So I'm going to be discussing the history of Chechnya, the demographics of Chechnya, how the Chechen Republic was formed, and the beginnings of the Russian and Chechen War. So the population in Chechnya is somewhere around 1,269,000 people, and that's projected from the Russian census in 2010. There are around 60 different ethnic groups that reside in the Caucasus region and 50 different languages. Some of those languages are as follows: Chechen, Russian, English, and Bati. Bati is a language spoken by many of the farmers there. Chechens make up the vast majority of the republic's population. They compose 93.5% of it. Other groups include Russians at 3.7%. However, there's speculation that the only Russians that still reside within the republic are those who are in the military. A lot of the Russians, when the war and stuff was going on, although it's not really going on right now, there's still sporadic bombings and stuff like that takes place. So a lot of the Russians, left the Chechen Republic and went to neighboring states like Moscow, Turkey, different places around Chechnya. Kumyks represent 0.8% and the English represent 0.3%, and some smaller groups make up less than 0.5% of the total population. The capital of Chechnya is Grozny. The Chechen Republic totals about 7,452 square miles, and it has 3 regions. The down south is, they label it the Greater Caucasus, and its peaks, and it forms the Southern Republic boundaries. And the highest peak is Mount Tabulosmat. I don't know how to say it. I don't know how to say a lot of these words. They're Russian or Chechen, whatever. Broad valleys of the Terek and Sunja rivers make up the second region. So the second region is made up of valleys. And the third region is made up of plains, and it's up north. It's called Noge Steppe. Said that like it was Spanish. Effects of the war destroyed Chechnya's economy, and the petroleum industry was the first sector to be rebuilt, probably because it's the biggest resource. But because of the war, production of oil is so much lower. From like 4.5 million metric tons or something like that to like 1.5 million after. It's a lot lower. Smuggling and bartering represents a significant amount of Chechnya's economy. Over 60,000 apartment buildings and private homes has been wrecked in Grozny, and less than 4% has been rebuilt. This is the region of Chechnya, a little map showing you where Chechnya is in relevance to Dagestan, and there's Georgia. A lot of Chechens migrated from Chechnya into these neighboring cities, states, whatever they call it, Dagestan, Georgia, Turkey. Some went to Moscow in Russia. In November 1920, the Chechen Autonomous Region was formed by the Bolsheviks. It was united with the English Autonomous Region in 1934 to form a joint Chechen-English Autonomous Region and became a republic 2 years later. Joseph Stalin was a Soviet leader, and he accused Chechen-English region of collaborating with Germans, so the group were forced to push towards Central Asia, and the republic was disbanded. This is a picture of Nikita Khrushchev. He was a Soviet leader who reestablished the republic once the exiles were allowed back into their homeland. This is a picture of them raving for their independence. In 1991, sectionist sentiments emerged, and this is around the time the Soviet Union declined. Zohokhar Dudiev, Chechen politician, former Soviet Air Force general, carried out mission to take over the local communist government in August of 1991. 2 months later, he was elected president of Chechnya. One month later, in November, he declared Chechnya's independence from Russia. Chechen Ingushetia split up into separate republics. Russian troops invaded Chechnya at the end of 1994 as a result of Chechen's independence. Chechen guerrilla resistance fought hard, but Russia managed to take over the capital city of Grozny. So this was pretty much around the This is like around the time the first war pretty much started, because they kind of labeled it in two different wars, and this is around the time the first war started. And this war was pretty much for the Chechens independence from Russia, and Russia really didn't want them to be independent. Most of the Chechens, by the way, are Muslims. Most of the Chechen Republic is made up of Muslims. So Dudiev was killed by Russian bombs, and the next year, Aslan Mashkadov was elected president, and he was a former guerrilla leader. Death of a rebel leader was a newspaper clipping, and it just, expressed how the rebels really mourned their fallen leader, and they vowed to carry on the fight against Russian forces for independence from Chechnya. 1994 to 1997, Russian troops invaded Chechnya. Around 100,000 people died in Chechnya around this time, and roughly 400,000 people fled their homes. And I told you guys in a couple slides before, when I showed you the map, the neighboring states they fled to. Russian troops withdrew from Chechnya and returned in 1999. Russia accused Chechen militia of terrorism. Although they never proved it, fingers pointed towards Prime Minister Vladimir Putin for bombings that killed many Russian civilians. Prime Minister Vladimir Putin, I think he's president of Russia now. But accusations circulate it was a way they could blame the Chechens for terrorism with hopes to regain control. So by this time, they had, they lost independence of Chechnya, and they were trying to regain control of Chechnya. So I really believe that, like, after all these readings, that it was the workings of Russians that actually bombed the school, like a school that killed many kids, just to find a way to get back into that land. So they expressed it on a War on Terrorism Act and went back in there. In 2002, Chechens took over a theater in Moscow and held close to 700 people hostage. This event forced Russians to become more aggressive in Chechnya. So in the theater, about 180 people died. Hostages died, and they were all killed. Most of them were killed by Russian forces actually trying to, take out the hostile takers, or the hostage takers. They were trying to take them out, so they pumped some kind of gas into the theater and ended up killing a lot of hostages. Chechen voters approved the new constitution in 2003. It delegated more power to the Chechen government, but the republic remained in the federation. The following year, bombings from the Chechens killed Russian leaders. In turn, the Russians killed several leaders in Chechnya. This type of back and forth fighting went on for years, and finally the Russian president withdrew his troops out of Chechen Republic. However, outbreaks of violence continued to occur. So this is pretty much summing up the history. It began as the Soviet Union was breaking apart in 1991. Muslims of the region wanted the same independence of the Baltic and Eastern European Soviet states had. With a long history of conflict between Russia and Muslim nations, Chechnya was a Muslim nation. Moscow refused to release Chechnya, neighboring Ingustia, the English. Resulted in fight for independence. Chechnya gained independence, but then Russia re-entered Chechen territory, and Russia reasons for trying to stay in control was reinforced by accusation of terrorism by Chechnya's militia. Russia regained control. Two incidents that really stand out. Raid on Moscow theater, around 130 hostages died. Earlier I said 180, was 130. Most of them by Russian security trying to stop Chechen militia. And a raid on school resulting in over 330 people, mostly child deaths, by the hands of Chechen militia. So that was enough to get them, back into the fight. And these are a list of references, and that's it.